The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant William Matthews adjusted his iconic bearskin hat for what he thought would be another ordinary day of duty. At 34, he had served as a Queen's Guard for 8 years, standing motionless for hours while tourists snapped photos and tried their best to make him smile, laugh, or even blink. His red tunic was perfectly pressed, his boots polished to mirror shine, and his expression was the practiced stone mask that had become second nature. William had always taken pride in his ability to remain completely still, no matter what happened around him. He had endured children pulling faces, adults making jokes, and even the occasional tourist who got too close for comfort. His training had prepared him for maintaining discipline under any circumstance, and he wore that discipline like armor. But nothing could have prepared him for what would happen that Tuesday morning in September. As William took his position outside the palace gates, he noticed a small crowd gathering nearby. This wasn't unusual. Tourists always collected around the guards hoping to witness something interesting. However, this group seemed different. They weren't holding cameras or guidebooks. Instead, they appeared to be a family, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, a middle-aged man pushing her, and 2 young children who seemed nervous and excited at the same time. The elderly woman wore a faded blue dress and a small hat with artificial flowers. Her hands, weathered by time, gripped a small envelope tightly. The man behind her wheelchair had tears in his eyes, and the children kept whispering to each other while pointing at William. For 20 minutes, the family stood there, clearly wanting to approach but hesitant. William could see them in his peripheral vision, and something about their presence felt different from the usual tourist interactions. There was an emotion in the air that he couldn't quite identify, hope mixed with nervousness, excitement tempered by uncertainty. The elderly woman finally spoke to her son, though William couldn't hear the words. The man nodded and slowly began pushing the wheelchair closer to where William stood at attention. As they approached, William could hear the woman's labored breathing and noticed the way her hands trembled slightly. When they were just a few feet away, the woman looked directly at William and said in a soft, shaky voice, "Excuse me, young man. I know you're not supposed to move or speak, but I have something very important to tell you." William's training kicked in immediately. He was not supposed to acknowledge visitors, speak to them, or break his stance under any circumstances. His superior officers had drilled this into him countless times. Yet something about this woman's voice, the way she looked at him with such familiar eyes, made his heart begin to race. The woman continued, "My name is Margaret Matthews. I believe you are my grandson, William. Your father here is my son, David, and these are your cousins, Emma and James." The words hit William like lightning. His grandmother Margaret had been searching for him for over 15 years, ever since a family argument had torn them apart when he was a teenager. His father had cut contact with the family after a bitter dispute about William's decision to join the military instead of pursuing university, studies that his grandfather had demanded. William's hands began to shake almost imperceptibly. Behind his stoic mask, emotions flooded through him. Joy, disbelief, longing, and confusion all battled within him. He wanted to break formation immediately, to embrace the grandmother he hadn't seen since he was 18, to talk to the father he had missed desperately but been too proud to contact. But his duty as a Queen's Guard held him in place. The years of training, the honor of his position, and the weight of tradition kept his feet planted firmly on the ground. His breathing became deeper, more controlled as he fought an internal war between his heart and his duty. His grandmother continued speaking, her voice growing stronger with each word. "William, I've been looking for you for so long. When I saw your picture in the local newspaper last month standing guard at the palace, I knew it was you immediately. You have your grandfather's chin and your father's eyes." The crowd around them had grown larger, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Other tourists pulled out their phones, beginning to record what they assumed would be another failed attempt to make a guard react. David, William's father, stepped forward slightly. "Son, I know we haven't spoken in years. I know I was wrong to cut contact after that argument with Dad. I've regretted it every single day since then. Your grandmother has been sick, William. The doctors say she doesn't have much time left, and finding you has been her greatest wish." At these words, a single tear formed in the corner of William's right eye. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure, but the tear escaped and rolled slowly down his cheek. Several people in the crowd noticed, and whispers began to spread that something very special was happening. Emma, one of his young cousins, tugged on her grandfather's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for William to hear, "Daddy, why won't he talk to us? Doesn't he remember us?" James, the other cousin, added, "Maybe he's not allowed to move. My teacher said the guards have to stand very still." William's heart broke hearing these innocent voices. These children were his family, and they didn't understand why he couldn't respond to them. Every fiber of his being wanted to kneel down, hug them, and explain that he remembered everything. Their grandmother's Sunday roasts playing in her garden, the bedtime stories she used to tell. His grandmother reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. She held it up where William could see it clearly. It was a picture of him at age 10, standing in her garden with the enormous smile, missing 2 front teeth, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Do you remember this day, William?" she asked softly. "You had just learned to ride your bicycle without training wheels, and you were so proud. You rode it all the way to my house just to show me. I made you chocolate chip cookies, and you ate so many you got a stomachache." William did remember. That memory was one of his most treasured from childhood, and seeing the photograph brought it flooding back with perfect clarity. His chest tightened with emotion, and for a moment he forgot where he was, forgot about his duty, forgot about everything except the love he felt for this remarkable woman who had helped raise him. The photograph trembled in Margaret's weathered hands as she held it higher, making sure William could see every detail. The crowd around them had grown silent, sensing they were witnessing something far more profound than a typical tourist interaction with a Queen's Guard. Even the other guards stationed nearby seemed to be paying closer attention, though they maintained their rigid positions. William stared at the image of his younger self, and more memories began flooding back. He remembered the smell of his grandmother's kitchen, always filled with the aroma of fresh bread and tea brewing. He remembered her gentle hands bandaging his scraped knees after bicycle accidents, and her patient voice teaching him to tie his shoelaces properly. Most of all, he remembered feeling completely safe and loved in her presence. Margaret tucked the photograph back into her purse and pulled out a letter instead. The envelope was creased and worn as if it had been handled many times. "William," she said, her voice stronger now despite her physical frailty, "I've been carrying this letter for 3 years, hoping someday I might find you to give it to you. Your grandfather wrote it before he passed away. He wanted you to know how sorry he was about that terrible argument." David stepped closer to his mother's wheelchair, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. His own eyes were red with unshed tears as he watched his son struggle to maintain military composure, while clearly being overwhelmed with emotion. "Mum has traveled from Scotland just for this moment," he said quietly. "She's 87 years old, William, and this journey was very difficult for her. But she insisted on coming when she saw your picture in the paper." William's mind raced back to that awful day 15 years ago, when everything had fallen apart. His grandfather had demanded he abandon his plans to join the military and instead attend university to study law or medicine. Proper professions for a Matthews man, he had said. When William refused, harsh words were exchanged. His grandfather had called him foolish and ungrateful. William, young and proud, had stormed out, declaring he never wanted to see any of them again. His father had tried to mediate, but when William enlisted anyway, David had felt caught between his own father's disappointment and his son's stubborn independence. In a moment of weakness and frustration, David had chosen his father's side, cutting off contact with William entirely. It was a decision that had haunted him every day since. Little Emma tugged on her father's coat again. "Daddy, is that really our cousin William? The one in all the pictures at Grandma's house?" Her innocent question carried across the courtyard, and several tourists began to realize they were watching a family reunion unfold before their eyes. Young James, perhaps 6 years old, suddenly broke away from the group and ran directly toward William. Before anyone could stop him, he wrapped his small arms around William's leg and looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. "Hi, William. I'm James. Grandma talks about you all the time." The spontaneous hug from his young cousin nearly shattered William's composure entirely. He could feel the child's warmth through his uniform, could smell the scent of bubble gum and innocence that seemed to surround all small children. Every instinct screamed at him to break protocol, to kneel down and hug this little boy who was his blood, his family. But his training held firm, even as his heart broke a little more. He remained perfectly still, looking straight ahead, though his breathing had become noticeably deeper and more controlled. Several people in the growing crowd wiped their own eyes, moved by the obvious emotion of the moment. David gently coaxed James back to the family group, whispering, "Remember what we talked about, son? William can't move or talk while he's working, but that doesn't mean he doesn't want to." Margaret reached into her bag once more and pulled out a small hand-knitted scarf in royal blue. "I made this for you last Christmas," she said, holding it where William could see. "I didn't know where you were, but I made it anyway, hoping someday I'd be able to give it to you. I know you can't take it now, but I wanted you to see it, to know that not a single holiday has passed without me thinking of you." The simple gesture of the knitted scarf nearly undid William completely. His grandmother had always been an expert knitter, creating beautiful sweaters and scarves for everyone in the family. He remembered sitting by her side as a child, watching her needles click together rhythmically while she worked, listening to her stories about their family history and her own childhood in rural Scotland. A tourist from nearby called out, "Is this really happening? Is that guard actually crying?" Indeed, more tears had begun to slide down William's cheeks, though he kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. The crowd was now completely silent, everyone sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Margaret began to cough, a harsh, rattling sound that immediately concerned her son. David quickly produced a water bottle and helped her take small sips while Emma and James watched with worried expressions. The coughing fit reminded everyone present, including William, that this reunion was happening against a ticking clock. When Margaret recovered, she looked directly at William again. "I need you to know something, my dear boy. Your grandfather's last words were about you. He said, 'Tell William I was wrong. Tell him I'm proud of the man he became, and I'm sorry I was too stubborn to see it while I was alive.' He kept a newspaper clipping about your military achievements in his wallet until the day he died." This revelation hit William like a physical blow. His grandfather had been proud of him after all, the man whose approval he had craved as a teenager, whose disappointment had driven him away from the family, had actually come to respect his choices. All these years of pain and separation might have been avoided if pride hadn't stood in the way on both sides. The crowd around them continued to grow, and William became aware that several of his fellow guards were now watching the scene unfold. His sergeant would normally have intervened by now if tourists were causing a disruption. But something about this situation seemed to have affected even the most hardened military personnel present. Margaret's voice grew softer, more urgent. "William, I know you can't speak to me right now, but I need you to know that I forgive you for everything. That argument was so long ago, and life is too short for old grudges. You are my grandson, and I have never stopped loving you, not for a single day." David stepped forward again, his voice cracking with emotion. "Son, I failed you 15 years ago. I chose sides when I should have been a bridge between you and your grandfather. I let my own hurt and confusion drive away the most important person in my life. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I want nothing more than to have my son back in my life." William's internal struggle was becoming visible to everyone watching. His jaw tightened as he fought to maintain control. His hands remained perfectly still at his sides, but his chest rose and fell with increasingly rapid breaths. The conflict between his duty as a Queen's Guard and his love for his family was tearing him apart. Emma, sensing the emotional weight of the moment despite her young age, suddenly started crying. "Why can't families just hug each other?" she sobbed. "Why does William have to stand there like a statue when his grandma came so far to see him?" Her innocent question echoed what everyone in the crowd was thinking, and it struck at the very heart of William's dilemma. Emma's tears seemed to break something inside William that all the previous emotional moments hadn't quite managed to touch. Here was a child, his own cousin, crying because she couldn't understand why family members couldn't simply embrace each other. Her pure, innocent confusion about the barriers between people who loved each other struck him more powerfully than any military order ever could. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people now, all standing in respectful silence as they watched this extraordinary scene unfold. Phones were recording, but somehow the atmosphere remained reverent rather than intrusive. Even hardened London locals who normally rushed past tourist attractions had stopped to witness what was clearly a profound human moment. Sergeant Major Richards, William's commanding officer, had been observing from a distance for the past 10 minutes. He was a career military man with 30 years of service, someone who valued discipline and protocol above almost everything else. Yet as he watched one of his finest guards struggle between duty and family love, something stirred in his own heart that he hadn't felt in years. Margaret reached out slowly, her fragile hand extending toward William, but stopping just short of touching his uniform. "I know you can't speak, my darling boy, but maybe you could give me just the smallest sign that you remember me. That you remember how much we loved each other." The request was simple, heartfelt, and completely against regulations. William's training manual was crystal clear about maintaining position regardless of circumstances. He had been taught to ignore everything from medical emergencies to natural disasters if necessary to preserve the dignity and tradition of the Queen's Guard. But this wasn't a tourist trying to get a reaction for entertainment. This wasn't someone attempting to distract him from his duties for selfish reasons. This was his dying grandmother, reaching across 15 years of separation, asking for nothing more than acknowledgement that their family bond still existed. William's breathing became more labored as the internal war intensified. His left hand began to twitch almost imperceptibly, and his usually perfect posture showed the tiniest signs of strain. Several people in the crowd noticed these subtle changes and held their collective breath, wondering if they were about to witness something unprecedented. David moved his mother's wheelchair slightly closer, positioning it so she could look directly into William's eyes. "Son," he said quietly, "I know this is incredibly difficult for you. I know your duty means everything to you, and I respect that. But your grandmother has been planning this moment for months. She sold her wedding ring to afford the train ticket from Scotland." This detail hit William like a punch to the stomach. His grandmother's wedding ring had been her most precious possession, a simple gold band that she had worn for 63 years until his grandfather passed away. The idea that she had sacrificed something so meaningful just for the chance to see him again was almost unbearable. Margaret smiled through her own tears and nodded. "It was worth every penny, William. Just seeing your face again, seeing the fine man you've become, it's worth everything I had to give up." Little James, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly piped up with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "Grandma, why don't you just give him a big hug? That's what my mom does when I'm sad, and it always makes me feel better." Before anyone could stop him, James ducked under his grandfather's arm and ran to William again. This time, instead of hugging his leg, the little boy stood directly in front of the guard and looked up at him with enormous, earnest eyes. "William," James said in his clear, young voice, "Grandma has pictures of you everywhere in her house. She talks about you every time we visit. She makes your favorite cookies every year on your birthday, even though you're not there to eat them. She loves you so, so much." The innocent words from his 6-year-old cousin finally pushed William beyond his breaking point. A sob caught in his throat, and for just a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked. His chin trembled slightly, and more tears flowed freely down his cheeks. Sergeant Major Richards made a decision that would later be discussed in military circles for years to come. He stepped forward, his own eyes suspiciously bright, and spoke in a voice that carried authority across the courtyard. "Guard Matthews," he said formally, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you are hereby granted a 5-minute personal emergency break." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause and cheers. Even other tourists who had just arrived and didn't fully understand what was happening began clapping, swept up in the obvious emotion and joy of the moment. William looked at his commanding officer with shock and gratitude. Sergeant Major Richards gave him the slightest nod and said quietly, "Some things are more important than protocol, son. Your grandmother didn't travel all this way to talk to a statue." For a heartbeat, William remained frozen in position, 15 years of separation warring with 8 years of military discipline. Then slowly he began to move. First, he turned his head to look directly at his grandmother for the first time in their conversation. The crowd held its breath as they watched this simple human gesture that seemed monumentous in the context of his previous stillness. Margaret gasped with joy when their eyes met properly. "Oh, William," she whispered, "you look so much like your grandfather did when he was young." William's next movement was to slowly, carefully, lower himself to one knee so that he was at eye level with his grandmother in her wheelchair. The crowd's cheers grew louder, but all the noise seemed distant and unimportant compared to the connection he was finally allowing himself to feel. "Grandma," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion from not speaking for hours during his guard duty. "I have missed you so much." Those simple words unleashed a flood of emotion from everyone present. Margaret reached out with both hands to cup her grandson's face, her thumbs wiping away his tears as she had done so many times when he was a child. "My precious boy," she said, her own voice breaking. "My precious, precious boy. I knew you'd grown up to be someone special. Look at you, so handsome in your uniform, so strong and brave." David knelt down beside his mother's wheelchair, placing one hand on William's shoulder and one on his mother's arm. "We're family," he said simply. "We should never have let pride and stubbornness keep us apart for so long." Emma and James, who had been watching with wide eyes, suddenly rushed forward to join what had become an impromptu family huddle. Emma threw her arms around William's neck while James hugged his arm, and for a moment, all the years of separation melted away as if they had never existed. The crowd around them was now openly weeping. Moved by the raw humanity and love they were witnessing, strangers hugged each other, parents pulled their own children closer, and everyone seemed to understand that they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. The power of family love to overcome any obstacle, even military protocol and years of hurt. The family embrace lasted for what felt like hours but was really only a few precious minutes. William found himself overwhelmed by sensations he had forgotten. The particular way his grandmother's hands felt against his face, soft but strong from decades of caring for others. The sound of her voice saying his name with such tenderness. The warmth of his young cousins pressed against him, full of uncomplicated love and acceptance. Margaret pulled back slightly to look at him properly, her eyes scanning his face as if she were memorizing every detail. "You've grown so tall," she said wonderingly, "and so serious. I remember when you were little you smiled all the time. You had such a mischievous grin." William managed a watery smile at the memory. "I still do sometimes, Grandma, just not while I'm on duty." "Tell me everything," Margaret said urgently, as if she suddenly realized how little time they had. "Tell me about your life, your work, if you're happy, if you've found someone special to love." Before William could answer, Sergeant Major Richards approached and cleared his throat respectfully. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said gently, "but we need to think about getting Guard Matthews back to his position soon." The reminder of reality caused a shadow to cross the family's joy. They had found each other again, but William still had his duties and Margaret was clearly exhausted from the emotional reunion. David stood up, helping his mother sit more comfortably in her wheelchair. "We understand," he said to the sergeant major. "We're just grateful you allowed this moment to happen at all." William looked between his commanding officer and his family, suddenly struck by an idea. "Sir," he said formally, "I have accumulated leave days that I haven't taken in over 2 years. Would it be possible for me to request emergency family leave?" Sergeant Major Richards studied William's face for a moment. This young man had been one of his most reliable guards, never missing a shift, never complaining about difficult assignments, always maintaining the highest standards of military bearing. If anyone had earned the right to a family emergency, it was William Matthews. "How long would you need?" Richards asked. William looked at his grandmother, noticing how frail she appeared despite her joy at their reunion. The coughing fit earlier, her trembling hands, the way she seemed to tire easily. All these signs pointed to someone whose time was limited. "A week, sir," William said. "Maybe 2 if possible." Margaret's eyes widened. "You would do that? Take time away from your important work, just to spend time with an old woman." "Grandma," William said, taking her hands in his, "you're not just any old woman. You're my family. You raised me when my parents were working. You taught me right from wrong. You made me feel loved and valued every single day I spent in your house. There's nothing more important than that." Richards nodded decisively. "Consider it approved, Matthews. Report to my office tomorrow morning to fill out the paperwork. For now, finish your shift, but I'll arrange for early relief so you can spend the evening with your family." The crowd, which had been watching this exchange with rapt attention, burst into another round of applause. Several tourists approached Margaret and David to express how moved they had been by the reunion, and more than one person mentioned that they would be calling their own estranged family members as soon as they got home. Emma tugged on William's red tunic. "Does this mean you can come to my birthday party next week? I'm turning 7 and Grandma said she would make her special chocolate cake." William looked down at his little cousin, struck by how easily children accept change and happiness. To Emma, the fact that her lost cousin was suddenly back in their lives was simply wonderful news that meant more family at her birthday celebration. "I would love to come to your birthday party," William said seriously. "What kind of presents do 7-year-old girls like?" "Books," Emma said immediately, "and art supplies, and maybe a pony, but Daddy says ponies are too expensive and our garden is too small." James chimed in. "I'm going to be 6 soon too. Will you come to my party as well?" "I'll come to every party I possibly can," William promised, meaning every word. Margaret watched this interaction with tears of joy streaming down her face. 15 years, she murmured to her son. 15 years we missed of watching him grow up, of sharing holidays and birthdays and ordinary days. I was so afraid we'd never get the chance to be a family again. David squeezed his mother's shoulder gently. "But we have that chance now, Mom. William has grown into an incredible man, and we have the rest of your time together to make new memories." As the family talked, other Queen's Guards on duty nearby had begun to notice the unusual situation. Word was spreading through their ranks about what had happened, and several guards found themselves thinking about their own families and the sacrifices military life sometimes demanded. Guard Johnson, stationed 50 yards away, thought about his own elderly father whom he hadn't visited in months due to duty schedules. Guard Williams remembered his sister's repeated invitations to family dinners that he had declined because he was too tired after long shifts. The ripple effect of William's reunion was already spreading to other men who suddenly realized that duty and family didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Margaret began to look tired, the excitement and emotion of the reunion taking its toll on her fragile health. David noticed immediately and began making preparations to take her back to their hotel to rest. "Before you go," William said quickly, "can I have your address? Your phone number? I want to call you tonight and I want to know exactly where you'll be staying while you're in London." Margaret smiled. "I've been carrying your contact information for 3 years, hoping someday I'd be brave enough to use it. Now I can finally give you mine." They exchanged information, and William carefully tucked his grandmother's address into his uniform pocket, treating it like the precious thing it was. As the family prepared to leave, Margaret reached for the letter she had mentioned earlier, the one from William's grandfather. "This is yours now," she said, pressing the worn envelope into his hands. "Read it when you're alone. Your grandfather wasn't good with words when he was alive, but he managed to say everything that mattered in this letter." William accepted the letter reverently, knowing it contained the closure he had never thought he would receive. The crowd began to disperse as it became clear the reunion was winding down, but many lingered to take photos of the family group and to continue wiping their own emotional tears. Several people approached William to shake his hand and thank him for allowing them to witness such a beautiful moment. One elderly gentleman, clearly a military veteran himself based on his bearing and the subtle insignia on his jacket, stepped forward. "Son," he said to William, "I served 30 years in Her Majesty's forces, and I want you to know that what you did today, choosing family while still honoring your duty, that takes more courage than any battlefield action." As Margaret's wheelchair was positioned to leave, she reached out one last time to touch William's face. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly, "not just because you're handsome and strong and serving your country, but because you have a good heart. That's what matters most in this world." That evening, after completing his shift and changing out of his ceremonial uniform, William sat in his small flat in London holding his grandfather's letter. The envelope was addressed in handwriting he recognized, careful, precise letters formed by a man who had learned to write with a fountain pen in an era when penmanship mattered. His grandfather had always been proud of his neat handwriting. William's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, filled with his grandfather's careful script. As he began to read, he could almost hear the old man's voice speaking the words. "My dear William," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. And hopefully your grandmother has found the courage to seek you out and give you this letter that I was too proud to deliver myself while I lived." William had to pause already, overwhelmed by the direct, honest tone. His grandfather had always been a formal man, not given to emotional expressions, so these words carried extra weight. I need to tell you that the day you left our house in anger was the day I began to understand what a foolish old man I had become. I was so concerned with what I thought your life should look like that I failed to see the fine young man you already were. You had honor, courage, and determination, and instead of celebrating those qualities, I tried to force you into a mold that was never right for you. Tears began to fall onto the paper as William read. These were the words he had needed to hear for 15 years, the acknowledgement that his choices had been valid and worthwhile. The letter continued. I followed your military career from a distance, son. I kept every newspaper clipping about your unit, every mention of your service, every photograph I could find. I was so proud of you, but my own stubborn pride prevented me from telling you so. I let my ego cost us precious years together, and that is a regret I will carry to my grave. William had to set the letter down for a moment to compose himself. All those years he had believed his grandfather disapproved of his life choices, that the old man thought him a failure for choosing military service over university. To learn that his grandfather had actually been following his career, collecting news about his achievements, was both wonderful and heartbreaking. He picked up the letter and continued reading. Your father tried many times to convince me to reach out to you, to swallow my pride and ask for your forgiveness. David is a good man who loves both of us, and watching him suffer because of my stubbornness was cruel and unfair. I hope when you read this you can find it in your heart to forgive him as well as me. The letter went on to share memories, stories about William as a child that his grandfather had treasured, moments of joy and laughter that had been overshadowed by their final argument. He wrote about teaching William to fish, about watching him learn to drive, about being secretly proud when William stood up to bullies at school. You were always brave, William, the letter said. Even as a small boy, you stood up for what you believed was right. That same courage that made me proud when you were 8 years old is what led you to serve your country. When you were 18, I was too blind to see that connection at the time. As William read these intimate memories, he realized that his grandfather had been paying much closer attention to his character development than he had ever understood. The old man had seen qualities in him that William himself hadn't recognized. The letter concluded with words that William would carry with him for the rest of his life. I am dying knowing that I failed to tell you how much I love you and how proud I am of the man you became. But I am also dying with hope that someday you will find your way back to your grandmother and father, because they love you just as much as I do. We are family, William. And family bonds are stronger than pride, stronger than arguments, stronger than years of separation. I pray that you will remember this and come home to us even if I am no longer there to welcome you. Your loving grandfather, Robert Matthews. William sat in his quiet flat for a long time after finishing the letter, letting the words sink in completely. The grandfather he had thought disapproved of him had actually been proud of him all along. The family he had thought had rejected him had been hoping for his return for 15 years. Around 10 o'clock, he called the number his grandmother had given him. Margaret answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting by the phone. William, she said hopefully. Yes, Grandma, it's me. I read Grandfather's letter. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then soft crying. What did you think, my dear? I think I wasted 15 years being angry about something that was never really as big as I thought it was, William said honestly. And I think I want to spend whatever time we have left making up for those lost years. Margaret's voice was full of joy when she responded. Tomorrow is Sunday. Would you like to come to our hotel for tea? I brought some of my photo albums from home. I thought you might like to see pictures of what you missed. Emma and James growing up, your father's life, the changes to the old house. I would love that more than anything, William said. And Grandma? I'm taking leave from work so we can spend real time together, not just a few minutes in a courtyard. Oh, William, she said, and he could hear that she was crying happy tears. That's the most wonderful news. The next morning, William woke up earlier than usual, not because of military duty but because of genuine excitement about spending the day with his family. He chose his clothes carefully, not his formal uniform but a nice sweater and trousers that would make his grandmother proud. As he looked in the mirror, he realized he was nervous in a way he hadn't been since childhood, the kind of butterflies that come from wanting desperately to make a good impression on people who matter. He arrived at the hotel carrying a small bouquet of flowers for his grandmother and gifts for Emma, and James, a book about horses. For Emma and a toy soldier set for James. The hotel lobby was modest but clean, and William could see his family waiting for him near the entrance to the tea room. Margaret was wearing her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and her eyes lit up the moment she saw him. David stood behind her wheelchair, looking more relaxed than he had the day before, while Emma and James bounced excitedly on either side of their grandfather. "William," Emma called out, running to hug him. "Daddy said you brought us presents." "Emma," David chided gently. "Let William say hello to Grandma first." William knelt beside his grandmother's wheelchair and kissed her cheek softly. "Good morning, Grandma. You look beautiful today." Margaret beamed, her wrinkled hands reaching up to pat his face. "And you look so handsome without that big furry hat. I can see your eyes properly now." The hotel had arranged a private corner of their tea room for the family, complete with proper china cups and a selection of cakes and sandwiches. As they settled around the table, William marveled at how natural it felt to be with them, as if the 15 years had compressed into nothing. Margaret had indeed brought photo albums, and as they shared tea and cakes, she began showing William pictures from the years they had been apart. There were photos of Emma's first steps, James learning to read, David's promotion at work, and family holidays at the seaside. Each picture came with a story, and William found himself laughing at anecdotes about his cousin's childhood adventures. "This one," Margaret said, pointing to a picture of David pushing both children on swings, "was taken last summer at the park near my house. Emma had just lost another tooth, and James was convinced he could swing high enough to touch the clouds." William studied the photo carefully, trying to memorize details about the family life he had missed. "Dad looks happy," he said, glancing at his father. David nodded. "I am happy, son. But I would have been happier if you had been there too. The children have been asking about their mysterious cousin William for years. I had to admit I didn't know where you were or what you were doing." "Tell us about your life," Margaret urged. "What do you do when you're not standing guard? Do you have friends, hobbies? Have you met a nice girl?" William found himself relaxing as he talked about his life in London. He told them about his small flat, his love of reading military history, his hobby of restoring old motorcycles. He mentioned Sarah, a nurse he had been dating for 6 months, and watched his grandmother's eyes light up with interest. "A nurse?" Margaret exclaimed. "Oh, that sounds like a wonderful girl. Nurses are caring people with good hearts. When do we get to meet her?" "Mum," David laughed, "let the boy breathe. He just found us again yesterday." But William was smiling. "Actually, I'd love for you to meet Sarah. She's working today, but she might be free tomorrow evening. Would you like to have dinner together?" The enthusiasm from his family was immediate and overwhelming. Emma clapped her hands and declared that she wanted to help pick out what William should wear for the dinner. James announced that he would show Sarah his favorite toys so she would know what kind of family she was joining. As the afternoon progressed, William learned more about his grandmother's health situation. The doctors had diagnosed her with heart problems and given her perhaps 6 months to live. She spoke about it matter-of-factly, but William could see the fear in his father's eyes. "I'm not afraid of dying," Margaret said quietly when the children were distracted by their new toys. "I'm only afraid of leaving this world without making peace with the people I love." "Yesterday when I saw you in that uniform, when I watched you choose family over duty, I felt like I could face whatever comes next." William reached across the table to take her hand. "Grandma, I want to come home with you to Scotland. I want to see the house again, spend time in your garden, maybe help Dad with some of the things you need." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, William, that would be the most wonderful gift you could give an old woman. But what about your work? Your life here in London?" "My commanding officer said I could take extended leave for family emergencies," William explained. "And honestly, seeing you again, being here with all of you, I realize that London will always be there, but family time is precious and limited." David leaned forward, his voice emotional. "Son, are you sure? I don't want you to sacrifice your career for us." William looked around the table at these people who loved him unconditionally, who had searched for him and welcomed him back without hesitation despite years of separation. "Dad, I've spent 8 years serving my country, and I'm proud of that service. But I've also spent 15 years away from my family, and that's time I can never get back. I can't waste any more of it." Emma, who had been listening with the serious expression children get when adults are discussing important things, suddenly spoke up. "Does this mean you'll be at my birthday party and James's birthday party and Christmas and everything?" "If you'll have me. William said solemnly. "I'll be at every celebration I can manage." James jumped up from his chair and hugged William tightly. "This is the best day ever. Wait until I tell my friends at school that my soldier cousin is coming home." Margaret watched this interaction with such joy on her face that she seemed to glow. "Robert would be so happy," she whispered. "He would be so proud to see his family back together." As the day wound down, they made plans for the following week. William would finish his duty paperwork and arrange for extended leave. The family would stay in London for a few more days so William could show them the sights and introduce them to Sarah. Then they would all travel together to Scotland, where William would stay for at least a month, possibly longer. "I want to learn how to make your famous shortbread," William told his grandmother. "And I want Dad to teach me about the family business. I want to hear all the stories about our relatives, see all the old family photos, and make up for as much lost time as possible." Margaret clasped his hands in both of hers. "My dear boy, you've already given me more than I dared hope for. Just having you back in our lives is enough to make every day precious." As William prepared to leave that evening, Emma ran up to him with a small drawing she had made during their tea time. It showed stick figures of their entire family standing in front of a house, all holding hands and smiling. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, she had written William's family. "This is for your flat," she said seriously. "So you don't forget about us when you go home tonight." William knelt down to her level. "Emma, I could never forget about any of you. You're the most important people in my world now." As he walked back to his flat that evening, William reflected on how completely his life had changed in just 2 days. He had gone from being a solitary soldier focused entirely on duty and discipline to being a beloved grandson, son and cousin surrounded by family who wanted nothing more than to love him and include him in their lives. 6 months later, William stood in the garden behind his grandmother's house in Scotland, watching the early morning mist roll across the hills he had loved as a child. The garden was exactly as he remembered it: rows of vegetables, climbing roses on trellises, and the old apple tree where he used to read books on summer afternoons. In his hands he held a cup of tea made exactly the way his grandmother had taught him, strong and sweet with just a splash of milk. Margaret had passed away peacefully 3 weeks earlier in her own bed, surrounded by her family. William had been holding her hand when she slipped away in her sleep, and her last words had been, "Thank you for coming home, my darling boy." The funeral had been exactly what she would have wanted: simple, filled with family and neighbors who had known her for decades, and overflowing with stories about her kindness and love. The reunion at Buckingham Palace had become something of a legend. Videos of the moment when William broke protocol to embrace his grandmother had been shared millions of times on social media, inspiring countless people to reach out to their own estranged family members. The palace had officially commended William for his service while privately acknowledging that sometimes human compassion must take precedence over protocol. William had taken a permanent transfer to a regiment based in Edinburgh, allowing him to stay close to his father and be the family anchor his grandmother had always wanted him to be. David had been initially concerned about William sacrificing his London career, but he had come to understand that his son was genuinely happier living near family. Sarah, the nurse William had been dating, had not only met the family but had fallen in love with all of them, especially Margaret. She had spent Margaret's final weeks helping with her care, and the old woman had whispered to William just days before she died that Sarah was perfect for him and that she hoped they would marry soon. William was planning to propose on what would have been his grandmother's 88th birthday. Emma and James had adapted to having their soldier cousin as a regular part of their lives with the easy acceptance of children. William attended every school play, birthday party, and family dinner. He had taught James to ride a bicycle and helped Emma overcome her fear of dogs. To them, it seemed perfectly natural that the mysterious cousin from the old photographs had simply materialized one day and become a permanent fixture in their family. David had flourished, having his son back in his life. The guilt he had carried for 15 years had gradually lifted as he watched William integrate seamlessly back into the family. They worked together on weekend projects around Margaret's house, which William had inherited along with the responsibility of maintaining the family home. Father and son had rebuilt their relationship through shared labor, and long conversations about everything they had missed in each other's lives. On this particular morning, as William stood in his grandmother's garden, he was preparing for a special visitor. The story of his dramatic reunion with his family had reached other military families dealing with similar situations of estrangement and separation. A young soldier named Michael, who had not spoken to his parents in 5 years after a bitter argument about his sexuality, was coming to talk with William about the possibility of reconciliation. William had become an unofficial counselor for military personnel struggling with family relationships. He understood the unique pressures of military life, the way duty and honor could sometimes create barriers between soldiers and their loved ones, and the devastating cost of allowing pride to destroy family bonds. As he heard a car approaching the house, William smiled, thinking about how his grandmother would have loved knowing that their reunion was helping other families heal. Margaret had always believed that love was meant to multiply and spread, that one act of forgiveness could ripple outward to touch countless other lives. The car pulled up, and William could see a young man in civilian clothes sitting nervously behind the wheel. Michael looked to be about 25, with the unmistakable bearing of a soldier even when out of uniform. William walked toward the car, remembering his own nervousness when approaching his grandmother's wheelchair that day outside Buckingham Palace. "Michael?" William called out. "I'm William Matthews. Thank you for coming all this way." The young soldier got out of the car, and William could see the mixture of hope and fear in his eyes that he recognized from his own experience. "Mr. Matthews, I'm not sure this is a good idea. My parents and I said some terrible things to each other. I'm not sure forgiveness is possible in every situation." William gestured toward the house. "Why don't we go inside and have some tea? I'd like to tell you about a letter my grandfather wrote that I didn't get to read for 3 years after he died. Sometimes the people we think will never forgive us are just waiting for someone to make the first move." As they walked toward the house together, William thought about the incredible chain of events that had started with one moment of human connection, overriding military protocol. His grandmother's courage in approaching him that day had not only reunited their family, but had created a legacy of healing that continued to spread to other families facing similar pain. In the kitchen, surrounded by his grandmother's familiar belongings and the lingering scent of her favorite lavender soap, William began to share his story with Michael. He talked about pride and fear, about the cost of stubborn silence, and about the miraculous healing power of choosing love over ego. "The thing about family," William said, pouring tea into his grandmother's best china cups, "is that the love is usually still there, even when it's buried under years of hurt and misunderstanding. Sometimes it just takes one person being brave enough to reach across the divide." Michael listened intently, and William could see the young man's defenses beginning to soften. "What if they reject me? What if I reach out and they slam the door in my face?" William smiled, remembering his own fears. "Then at least you'll know you tried. But my experience has taught me that parents who truly love their children are usually just waiting for permission to forgive. Most family arguments aren't really about the things we think they're about. They're about love and disappointment and fear of losing each other." By the time Michael left that afternoon, he had his parents' phone number written on a piece of paper and a promise to himself that he would call them before the week was over. William stood in the doorway watching the young soldier drive away, feeling his grandmother's presence so strongly it was almost as if she were standing beside him. That evening, as he sat in Margaret's favorite chair reading one of her old photo albums, William's phone rang. It was Emma, calling to tell him about her day at school, and to remind him that he had promised to help her with a history project about World War II. "Uncle William," she said. She had started calling him uncle rather than cousin, claiming it sounded more important. "Did you know that Grandma kept a scrapbook about you from when you were in the Army? Daddy found it when we were cleaning out her closet." William felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after death, his grandmother continued to surprise him with new evidence of her love. "No, sweetheart, I didn't know about that." "What kind of things did she keep?" "Pictures from newspapers and articles about your regiment, and even a program from when you got a medal. She wrote little notes on everything about how proud she was of you." As William listened to his young cousin chattering about her discovery, he realized that his grandmother's greatest gift to him had not been forgiveness or even reunion. It had been teaching him that love persists through time and distance and misunderstanding. That love, once established, never truly dies, even when it seems buried under years of silence. Later that night, as he prepared for sleep in the bedroom that had been his as a child, William looked out the window at the same view he had gazed upon decades earlier. Tomorrow he would call Michael to see how the conversation with his parents had gone. Next week he would visit another military family dealing with estrangement. Next month he would marry Sarah in the small church where his grandparents had been wed 64 years earlier. But tonight, he simply felt grateful for a moment of courage outside Buckingham Palace that had changed not just his life, but the lives of everyone who had witnessed love triumph over protocol. Family bonds prove stronger than pride, and one grandmother's determination to reclaim her lost grandson inspire others to heal their own broken relationships. The last thing William saw before falling asleep was Emma's drawing of their family, now framed on his bedside table, showing stick figures holding hands and smiling together. At the bottom, in her careful child's handwriting, were the words that had become his guiding principle: William's family. Simple words that contained everything that mattered most in the world.